Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and the winter fuel payment is like the big political story of the moment and may well keep coming up over the next few months as well. Indeed, I expect it will do. So I had a chat with Mike Galsworthy of European Movement UK about it, presenting a few different views here. So let's get into that. Right, so we're just having a little bit of a discussion before we officially started recording, and you've got some angles on the winter fuel allowance, which is a very hot potato at the moment, partly because I strongly suspect it's anything to do with pensioners is a big deal for politicians, and anything to do with elderly people is a big deal for the media, because elderly people take an active part in politics and tend to be large consumers of mainstream media as well. So it's a big thing. So what's your take on this then?
Right. I care less about that and more about no, I don't want to. I do care about pensioners and I do care about the vulnerable, of course. And I think that one of the major issues here is there has not been a published impact assessment before you ask MPs to go and march through and make decisions. And even if the MPs were to have seen it, there has not been adequate public discussion on what the data are, given pertinently that back in 2017, Labour did do an analysis on what it would mean if the winter fuel allowance was mean tested and found that it could cause deaths of up to 4,000 pensioners, which is, an alarming thing to say. So I think that this, regardless of any economic merits that may underpin this, has been awfully managed by the Labour Party, not least because it absolutely undermines Labour's brand from the get-go. What is it that Labour stand for? They came into power saying change, 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 and then
This is a
they
big change, to be fair, but not necessarily the thing they were promoting.
but the thing is, what is the coherent pattern about Labour coming in? They say, right, we're going to have change on you. Okay, we're out there, we're talking to you, but we've got our red lines on free movement, single market, customs union, but we're also going to have a red line on the Erasmus program that we're seeing, well, we're not contemplating that, and the youth mobility scheme. And they seem to be restricting themselves further. And then in terms of the social dynamics, it's like, right, Labour, we're in. Let's sort out the NHS issue with junior doctors. Okay, we put money in order to make things work, put money in people's pockets. This is where we're different from Tories. Okay, great. Oh, by the way, surprise pensioners. Now you can't rely on that anymore, and we're going to rip that away. And you just think you're backing and forthing. There isn't a coherent Labour brand here. And when Keir Starmer is being quoted as saying things like he makes no apologies about this decision, you just think that the sensitivity to a lot of people's genuine fears going into the winter after a long cost of living crisis, it's 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 the care that people want and hope for, and it seems as though Labour are, even if they haven't outright lied, seem cold, indifferent, callous, disingenuous, and opaque about what they tend to do. And it's very hard for them to build a brand from here. And I have to ask the question, who do Labour stand for, or what does Labour stand for? Because it's not the youth with the youth mobility scheme. It's not the left because they've already chucked the left. It's certainly not the pensioners. It's not the centrists as well, who tend to be pro-European. They're kind of trying to appeal to the Tory base, but they're always sensing weakness, so we're going to attack them. So who is Keir Starmer's base? Is the
So,
Keir?
so what I'll do, I'll
Because if you
point
don't
out.
stand up for anyone, then who do you think is going to stand up for you when you get into trouble? I can't work out who their base is meant to be apart from this working people thing, and I can come on to that in a sec as to
Yeah.
why that's
So
just
what I would say is I will argue with some of the points you've just made there.
good.
So and I've done this myself. So on the youth mobility and Erasmus, they're not red lines. In fact, they, although the likes of the Guardian multiple times have said, "Oh, Labour ministers ruled it out," they never have,
No.
and they never have. That it was clearly for me. So like, there's various other people saying Labour need to be clear about what they want from the EU. Now, to my mind, they have been, but whether they've produced detailed proposals is another matter. But it is clear what they want. What they want is the veterinary SPS deal. They
Yeah.
want a special deal for, and none of these, by the way, are easy or a given. Particularly if they keep delaying standards checks again, which they have done again last week. An agreement, a special agreement for touring performers, and what's the other one they want? Mutual recognition of qualifications. So those are the big three things they want. Now, it occurs to me that because these are all very difficult to bargain for, and will end up.
Ironically, they weren't difficult before when the
Well,
TCA was being
well,
negotiated
I mean,
because they were all being offered before.
we could have stayed in
They
the
could all
single
have
market
been in
before.
Johnson Steel.
We could have left the EU and stayed in the single market. Everything was on offer. But
Yeah, right.
But nonetheless, so it occurs to me that, and I said this some time ago, that but what Keir Starmer was doing was anything that the EU were keen on, like if he comes out and goes, oh, brilliant idea, yeah, that'd be brilliant for both of us, then all of a sudden, like, he's got to think of what he can offer in return. So, and you could argue this is clumsy, and it certainly sounds like it's backfired, but nonetheless, I can see how he's just thinking, look, these are the three things I want. Anything else, anything that the EU says they want is like, okay, so that's something you want. So that's why they say we're not planning on it. That's not the same thing as saying we don't want it. And actually, in that press conference, was it last week or the week before, when journalists were trying to pin him down, they were actually trying to say, are you ruling out the youth mobility scheme? Are you ruling out Erasmus? He wouldn't say he was ruling them out. So he's not ruling them out. We know we're going to get them.
Yeah,
He's
they
just
say
trying
they
to
have
use
no
it.
plans for it. Yeah, I get what you're saying. However, there was a great editorial in The Economist, and people actually read it both ways, which was Keir Starmer makes the clear win-win on youth mobility look like something that he's going to have to concede.
Yes.
And some people said, oh, yeah, isn't that brilliant? Well, I saw one person say,
I don't think it's brilliant because if we can surmise it, so can the EU Commission.
yeah. But I come back to Keir Starmer is not a master of mood music. He may be good at being diligent and thinking things through, but a lot of oil in systems happens by actually going with momentum, opening up imagination, getting people on board, making people think that you're a champion, these kind of dynamics. And by pouring cold water over everything, I think there's a lot more ambitious stuff that he could be talking about in a more excited way, which would actually get more people backing him and would make for warmer support in a lot of commentary in mainstream media or social media.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, one thing I would say, and actually, I think Labour, including Keir Starmer, are aware of this as well, because David Lammy said something quite interesting after they just formed the government. So my argument here is what we really want is just to get some formal talks on something going, because as soon as you get formal talks on something going, you can also have informal talks about other things over tea and biscuits or coffee and biscuits or whatever the hell they have during the break. And that's something we've missed. And there's a lot of people said that what we've now missed now that we've left the EU is all those informal discussions that used to take place with amongst officials as well as politicians in the European Parliament that allowed different countries to understand their position on various areas. So now we've had that conversation completely cut out. All the EU know about us now is what they'll read in the papers or in the media. And
And
so,
and we've had this chat before about the defense
yes,
and
because that's what David
security
Lammy was
framework.
talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, I don't care that a treaty and legal
Mm.
bindings come out of it. I just care that it's a big repositioning that involves a lot of conversations and a lot of the right sounding things, new music coming out,
Mm.
which works for the domestic audience in the UK, but then also eases up conversations on the continent. Anyway, we've gone careering
But
away from
but what
winter
I was
fuel.
point is they're not Erasmus and Youth Mobility Scheme are not red lines. We will have them.
Yes, I know
I
they're
will
not red.
absolutely
They've
have them.
never been painted as red
But
lines, but they have had a degree of cold water poured on them, and that has not made people more patient. It's made people more irritated. I don't think that the actual
I would
handling.
say a lot of that is the way it's been reported there, because I've seen so many people share the headline, and I've had to point out if you read the article, it doesn't say that. There's so many times when a headline will say, you're more used to it of the Daily Express, but all of them will do it. They'll post a headline saying something's been said or something's ruled out, and then in the article it says the opposite.
Yeah.
And you have to be very
But
careful with
also,
political language to listen to exactly what they say.
yes, yes. But the mood of the people who see these headlines, if they're in love with Keir Starmer, they will read the article and they will be like you, and they'll say, no, 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 I believe
Well,
that there's a long game in here and da 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 da
I
da.
will just
But
point
if
out,
they're
I don't.
already
Go on.
annoyed with Keir Starmer, they'll gladly take the headline at face value and
Yeah,
splam,
but
spam,
that's
spam.
down to the reporting. That is what I say. That is down to the reporting, and you cannot even when Keir Starmer, and I will say, I like, so when I love Keir Starmer, I don't support any politician. I don't know them. I don't support anyone I don't know personally, because that's folly. That is folly, because they will do some things you approve of and some things you don't. It's a bit like as a teacher. As a teacher, you're trained to do with a kid is to focus on the behaviour, not them. So that when the kid, because there will be some kids who are, let's be honest, arseholes. And you have to sort of say, oh, you're not supposed to do that, not supposed to do that a lot. And then you'll get, oh, you don't like me, sir. And then what you're supposed to say to them is, I do like you. I just don't like your current behaviour. And I have the same attitude to politicians. There are behaviours, and there are behaviours I approve of and don't. The person behind them is utterly irrelevant. You can have someone who does the most terrible things every day of their life, and then one time they say something you agree with, it says, well, I also agree with that. It doesn't, I don't not agree with it just because I don't like everything else they do. And the same thing with the other way around.
I agree. I'll phrase it slightly differently because I've thought down these lines too. The person behind it, you should always feel love for because they are human with human foibles. But when you get angry and when you have to point something out, you're not putting the whole person in the bin. You're identifying the behavior that you don't like and say, I don't like that. Strip that away from yourself. It's doing you no good. I believe in you behind it.
Yeah, but I mean, I have little sympathy for any politician. They shouldn't be like, they shouldn't be like sent. We know where people go too far by sending threats of violence or something like that, or you know, door stopping them outside their own home where their family lives, stuff like that. I don't go with that. But any general stick a politician gets, they have no sympathy from me because they choose to do it. And the more senior the politician, the more the more fiercely they've chosen to do it. So I have no sympathy for anyone getting stick, whether it's fair or not. It's all part of the political game, and that applies to the media. The media will present things like that. You have to factor it in. But I'd also say, in terms of going back to your original point, who do Labour stand for? Most especially, it is working people. They made no secret about that. It is working people. That is
Can
why.
you talk about this phrase, working people?
So they've also defined it. They have defined it as being people on low to middle incomes in work.
Yeah. So here's my issue with it. It's because when you become a government, when you come out of a party contesting for government, when you become a government, you have a responsibility. That responsibility is to all citizens of the
Oh yes.
country. So
But
when you say something like working people, I know you say they've defined it, and I'm going to come on to that definition in a bit. But first of all, um, why just working? Because there's a lot of people that have finished up their working. They are pensioners. They have earned their living. Let me continue.
Go on.
There's also people going through education at all levels. There are also young children. There are also stay-at-home mothers who've just given birth to twins or something like that. There are also people between jobs who are doing their damnedest on it. So when you say working people, in the literal sense, you actually reduce your focus of what you care about as a population right down to a sector that you're going to be championing. That is divisive, but they're not saying it for that reason. It's not just that they're focused on productivity and be damned with the rest. It is also that phrase, working people, is dog whistle, if you will, for working class. They're still trying to recapture the original Labour base, which is the working class. They are prepared to give out indicators that they're not interested in kind of like the middle classes and well-to-do. We are the party of the working class. We don't want to say class. We
I,
want to say people. And I think that their insistence on going working people, not many people are picking up on this, but it's beginning to really bother me because it is a campaign, it's a government that's just come into power and they're still campaigning on identity, and that identity is myopic and mean and narrow rather than being expansive and saying, we are here for all the school kids, we're here for all the students, we're here for people on low incomes, we're here for people setting up businesses, we're here for the pensioners, we're here for all Brits and their diversity of needs.
but they've got a lot of policies that are directly targeted at young people. For example, they're
So
something
what?
with
So then, what's the insistence on working people, working people, working people?
because that's their voters.
Still going after
That's politics. That's their voters. That will always happen. That's their voters.
yeah. But
That's their
when you're in
target
government,
voters.
is different, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but again, government, like they are still a political party that wants to win the next election. In government, they're still doing all these things, though. There's a lot of things they're doing. But just like in an election campaign, you've only got so much bandwidth, and again, that comes back to the media as well. It will fixate on things. Now, I do think Labour are also fixating, because when you say about this message, it's quite clear they're obsessing at the moment with the message of the message they're trying to get through at the moment. The single message is the Tories have completely wrecked everything, and that is why we're having to do all this action. That's what I mean. It seemed mad to me at the weekend when Keir Starmer said, I can't remember the exact words, but it was about being unpopular. We have to accept being unpopular. It's like, when does a politician ever say that? No. And there are positive things they can say. There are positive things they can even say around the winter fuel allowance. Now, from a policy point of view, what I think is bad is it's not the people who don't need it. There are plenty of people who don't need it.
Yep.
It's the fact that there are going to be some people who do need it who are not going to get it. And
Yes.
that is in two ways. First of all, although Labour have genuinely been pushing on people getting pension credit where they haven't been getting it before, to the point where it's not even just encouraging them to apply. Some are now automatically getting. It's like, well, if they get housing benefit, of course they should get pension credit. So the process has been made easier for some, and that is worth a lot of money. So when I always great when people say, oh, they're abandoning the most vulnerable, because by definition the most vulnerable are those who are eligible for pension credit and not taking it because they don't realise. Labour are now pushing this. And I'll also say, because I've had a few comments of people saying, oh, but that'll screw their budgets if they're too good with that, because then they'll be shelling out more on that. It's like, no, because they already budget for that. Budgets are weird. Like, money's weird. Money doesn't exist really, but we have to pretend it does. And when the government is budgeting for pension credit, it doesn't budget based on how many people are drawing it. It's based on how many they think will. So in theory, we're actually going to end up with a load of money left over. But you can't assume that in the budget.
On the national level, it's always useful to talk about credit and debt management.
But but there are. So that's where the policy is bad for me, and where what they'd have been better off doing is arguably leaving it a year, or at the very least setting the bar. Like Martin Lewis had a very good idea. Other people have picked up on it. Just anyone who's in a council tax band A to D, just make sure they get it. You could always fine tune it the following year. But I think Labour have this obsession with anything that you're going to do that's unpopular, you do early on. Because, you know, whatever you think Labour will stand for, it is going to emerge. They're not going to be doom and gloom in a couple of years' time.
But then you have to lose people and win them back. And that's an extremely hard process.
That's assuming you're losing people, because the polling evidence suggests otherwise. What you've got at the moment, and I think they have messed up, and I think they've messed up politically.
These things take time to really filter through. My main issue here is that, and of course I understand the argument of doing unpopular things first because you're spending your political capital. I would question just how deep their political capital is. But my major issue here is how you handle the psychology of the nation. Are you handling the psychology of the nation responsibly? You know, details of money management and the policy aside, if people are getting scared, if people are getting depressed, if people don't have hope and don't feel as though they even have a say in the conversation, all of these things really corrode any remaining bonds of trust between the public at large and the government. And so I think if you were to leave it another year, and if you were to say this year, listen, this year we're covering the winter fuel allowance as we always have. We don't want anyone to be alarmed. We want everyone to be able to plan. But I'm telling you that it does going forward have to be a means set thing. This is unsustainable. And we will open up a public consultation that involves all the major charities, that involves some of the best thinkers. We will have those discussions and debates because we need to make this system fair.
I wouldn't do that. That would be a political nightmare.
Why?
But I would have, because then the last thing you want is a conversation about cuts as a government. The last thing you want to do is invite a conversation about cuts. You want what they want to do politically is to avoid the scenario, which I think is going to happen, and I do not understand why they want to invite this. So there are, I mean, you know, you mentioned about in 2017, Labour had worked out, John McDonnell, wasn't it, had worked out that an extra would have to say 4,000 pensioners could die as a result of what the government at the time were planning.
Yeah.
And because it is already the case that about 4,000 elderly people die every year as a result of their home being too cold.
Yep.
So that is already the case. Now, here's the political problem that I do not know why they'd want to invite morally or just politically. There will be journalists who are now, they make nothing of the fact that, I mean, this should be a national disgrace, the fact that thousands of elderly people die specifically because their home is too cold every year. There will be, and nothing is made of it, it will be this year. They will absolutely go on a hunt. They just want one person who dies who had the winter fuel payment taken off. In fact, do you know what? They'll find someone who died. They won't even care if they had the winter fuel payment taken off or not. They'll say they did. But it will help them if they at least put some effort in and try and find someone who genuinely lost that payment.
Yeah,
and
100%.
And that is a political nightmare, and it's just not worth it for £1 billion.
Yeah, 100%. You're spot on with that, and that kind of predatory advantage taking of this has happened already by one of the best political operators in this country, namely Nigel Farage, who put out a tweet of him sat with a World War II veteran who was lined up to have their winter fuel allowance taken away, or at least fearful of it. I can't remember which. It doesn't matter.
No.
The tweet's got thousands and thousands of likes. Look at these people that have served our country for us now being screwed over by the new government. And like you say, all you need to do is find one that dies as a result, and it's guaranteed there will be one. And all the other journalists and the tabloid press will be like, but I talked to her just 2 weeks ago. I can't believe, Jez got in there before me. right? It will be just like you say.
Yeah.
It is that cynical,
Um,
and
but
they,
long
and
term,
that's what I'm talking about in
yeah.
terms of the mood management of the country, and it's the psychological management of the
But
country.
they know that voters have very short term memories. They also know that if in a few years' time,
But things like this do stick. It's a first action, it's an early action. We're going into winter. Everyone's waiting for the horror.
I don't think it does stick.
I think,
In fact, it's the
think it will.
political wisdom it doesn't stick. That's why they do these things early on, because they know that voters come the following election, as long as by then, if because what Labour, 100%, what Labour are planned to do in, well, I don't know whether it's the following budget or the one after, is to say, because we've now fixed the foundations, to use their words, we can now do this, 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 and this. And they will point out how now it's easier to access healthcare. I don't know if they'll be able to say that about social care even in 10 years' time, but that is part of the aim.
Well, I
They
mean, that is true. The memory of them doing this will certainly go into this winter, but it won't go into 4 to 5 years from now. That's it. But however, if you get yourself um, with one rugby tackler stuck on you, it slows you down, then others start piling in. Um, all I would say is that they're losing a lot of political capital very early on. They think they'll be able to take that, but I think it's a little more perilous than they
Well, I
realize
think it's pro, but not on the part of
because it
voters.
goes deeper to the brand and deeper to
Yeah,
uh, the building attack and disgruntlement from the left, which I think is going to grow over time.
I, I don't. I think
Okay?
that when they start to bring in improvement, which they know they need to do, then it'll be very different from the voters. The political capital they're expending, if you like, but I don't really think it is a case of that, is actually on the part of their MPs. Because one thing I said before the election is a problem that Starmer's going to face, because everyone kept, and when like people talk about these super majorities which don't even exist, but they were still saying it as if it's some extra boon to have an extra large majority. I said, no, it's a problem, it's a headache, because they're going to have so many new MPs that don't
Yep.
know how to be MPs, and they're going to panic, and they're not going to know how to behave. And because you need a certain number of MPs to be ministers, they behave themselves if they want to carry on being ministers. Then you need like twice as many again to make sure you can get your votes through Parliament and ram through the rebels. Anything above that is not a luxury; it's a headache, because they're
Yep.
still backbenchers. They've got the potential to cause trouble, and because Labour lost the election so badly in 2019 and won it so handsomely in 2024, literally over half of their MPs are brand new MPs and do not know how to be MPs. And they'll be
Yep.
inundated with these concerns, and they're thinking to themselves, "Oh, I only won like by a few hundred votes or a couple of thousand votes. This is a big problem for me," and they're losing their heads. And that's what
It's
I don't think the
yeah.
leadership are taking account of.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's a very big flock to keep whipping. And I think that there's plenty of opportunity for new groups to be forming. Like you said, in government, you can give out about 100 or so jobs for core functionality, beyond which you find, some chairs for some committees,
Mm.
but then you've still got a lot of people twiddling their
Yeah.
thumbs. Some of them veterans, a lot of them new. How do you keep them entertained and building their careers? The more things go wrong, or the more divisions there are within your party, the more you start developing new little ERGs,
Yes.
or alternative interest groups. Also, because you've got Jeremy Corbyn on the outside and some of the other independents that were hardcore on issues of Gaza, but also the two-child benefit cap
Yeah.
and things
Poverty,
like that.
basically. Jeremy Corbyn's an anti-poverty campaigner, ultimately.
Yeah, yeah. But should things go wrong for Labour, there's a new thing that can be coalescing there. And there will always be siren calls from that group. So I
But that's the thing.
I agree with you that there will be forgetfulness of this over the years, but like you've indicated, there are longer memories that exist within parliamentarians and also some areas of the media. And when people get pissed off, they start getting, itchy and start looking around.
Yeah, that's ultimately where the problem's going to be. It's discipline within the party.
Yeah.
Because I mean, in terms of Keir Starmer, he's not a politician. There are some benefits of that. What he is an effective administrator. He knows how to
It,
run complex projects. But
yes.
up until now, those complex projects, when he's been running them, he's had people under him who sort of have to do what he says.
Mhm.
And now that's not
And
strictly the case.
the pressure has been on to we have to do this in order to get into government. Now
Yeah.
they're in government, it's people will start getting comfortable, and lots of different things could happen. 400 people is a lot to try and keep close.
Yes. I mean, so far it just depends on how long they have to do it, because there will be some MPs who are going, well, we need to give it this time. It's a case of when people say, oh, the honeymoon's over, the honeymoon's over. It's not over. It's it would be a short honeymoon if it's over after a year, which is entirely possible. I know there was some polling after the election saying actually quite a lot of Labour voters expected to see results after a year, because that's when the honeymoon's over, when you've given the government time. So you say about a year, but from MP's
Individual
point of view,
differences,
it
it
could be very
varies
different.
for different people. The more politically engaged you are, the sooner the honeymoon is over.
Yeah,
The
but
more
also the smaller of the
disengaged
electorate
you
you are.
are, yeah. Um, but anyway, so we'll see with the winter fuel allowance. I think it was fun that we had that little chat because we do view it slightly differently. We'll see how it pans out, but I think the psychological management of it has been surprisingly bad.
I think it's been. Oh no, I think the management's been awful. But from a political point of view, I think it's a bad policy to allow anyone who needs that money not to get it, or to put
Mhm.
anything in place, because there have been other ideas as well, like the social tariff, which I don't know whether is being seriously discussed or not, because I'm hearing conflicting things about that. But if they don't, like if they allow any news story, it's not about handling the politics, because these are people's lives as well. If they allow any indication that people have suffered, as genuinely suffered as a
Yes.
result of it, we know that lots of people who don't need the 200 quid will whine about it anyway, because anyone will whine if you try and take 200 quid off them.
Yeah. But
Like, because as far as they're concerned,
you give something to someone, taking
yes,
it away is super
like,
hard.
exactly. So they've been
But
used to this for a long time.
one of the ways that you do that, and you know this with infants and toddlers, it's the old switcheroo. It's kind of like,
Yeah.
oh no, you don't want this nice crystal thing. It's like you want this beaker because look, it's got the measurement stuff on it. It's
Well,
more practical for pouring. This is what you really want. But they didn't actually
that
sell a
no.
better
Well,
system
that's
before
what
they
I
tried to
thought was
switch
mad.
it in.
So here's the thing. I mean, we know that the budget is a massive things, and some of the taxes spent and maybe cuts and stuff like that is being used to fill up this 22 billion pound black hole, and then more of it is the 19 billion that we did know about and no one wanted to talk about. And then there's other things as well. But like in their manifesto, Labour linked things. They said, for example, the VAT on private schools is going to fund the breakfast clubs and the new teachers. Now, we know it's not really what's happening. They're raising taxes and they're having spending plans. But they linked the two together. And actually, I'll go back to 2017 when the Conservative Party manifesto said they were going to means test winter fuel allowance, and which I don't think is as big a stick to beat the Tories over as some imagine, because they did lose their majority. So they're free to say now that it was a bad idea. But in it, they linked it. They said, we're going to remove it from those who are better off, and we're going to use it to fund health and social care to provide dignity for older people. And I don't know why Labour didn't just say, we need to do this so that we can afford these spending
Yeah.
plans. instead of just Rachel Reeves is
the
literally
switch route.
saying
You
we're
identify
throwing it
the
in this
money
hole.
and you say opportunity costs here. You don't want that. You want this. So take from that to give to this.
Yes.
And you can sell that.
And the thing is, the black hole, you could say you're filling that with all the stuff that isn't anything to do with your voters. Like, when they talk about the increase in taxes, I know the capital gains and anything to do with the inheritance tax is not going to amount to 22 billion, but you could say that is being used to fill in that hole. And if the Tories want to whine about it, they shouldn't have left the hole. And they certainly shouldn't have hidden the hole. But something that is going to be controversial,
you always have to say what you're going to
link it to something popular,
achieve by it.
Yeah. So whereas that's what I think it is. I think the messaging at the moment, I think they're obsessed with with pushing this message that the Tories have broken literally everything, which is fine. But I do think they could afford to say, but we're still doing this, because they are still doing, I mean, they actually gained in popularity initially. It is okay to lose popularity at this point, as long as they gain it again, when they can start to do the positive stuff. But, Starmer's personal approval ratings, senior members of the government's approval ratings and the party's approval ratings went up in the weeks after the election.
Yes.
Because they announced things that the public really got on board with.
Yes. There was landing off around Europe like
so they could still remember. They could still remind people of those things.
Yes. Yeah. Totally.
I mean, in terms of
they came out of the traps really well, really positively. It did them a power of good, and it looked like they had a clear direction of travel. People didn't know exactly, but it looked like they were busy with stuff and good stuff and reaching out. And certainly the Wes Street and getting straight in there with the junior doctors and wanting to solve that quickly showed that it looked like they wanted to fix things internationally and nationally.
Yes. So there we are. If you'd like to join European Movement UK, link in the description below. Hope I remember to do that. There we are. Those are our thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.